things that are probably be nearly immaterial, right?
Right.
But I'll go back and revisit that.
Yeah, and I expect that everybody's at least taken one discrete math course since our last
I would hope
conversation.
so. I would
Right.
hope so.
Eduardo's got a big background in math. Eduardo, do you have any tips or advice for the audience for those who want to improve their mathematical and logical reasoning?
Yeah, like
No, seriously, yeah.
things.
Give some advice. Yeah.
I have no advice. I mean, I think as everything, you sharpen your skills when you use them. And mathematics is you can like be on a very theoretical level and discuss about theorems and stuff, which you have to do at some point. But I guess that the more that you benefit from using mathematics is when you actually use it. So just apply it and try to understand why it works when it works and how it works and how we can sharpen your mathematical reasoning by actually applying it. I mean, for at least that's the way I do it. It's with programming or with mathematics in general. It's if you really want to grasp a concept, and it's the same thing with languages.
Right.
So if you really want to speak a language and understand what's the the concepts or some words, why are they spoken the way they are, or just speak the language without thinking about it, then you need to practice a lot. And same things with mathematics. I think you get more benefit from it when you start using it. So
Yeah.
exercise, I guess you might say.
I agree 100%. Like there's
music too, right?
There's
Yeah.
a very,
music, like everything.
There's very good evidence that like your one class in formal logic does you almost no good,
right?
In terms of actually improving your reasoning skills. It has to become a lifestyle, right?
You have to. I think at least for me, I benefited from it a lot when I was actually solving mathematical problems at university.
Yeah. But you went right in, like you took logic and then you were in a world of discrete ideas, right? Yeah.
Same thing with mathematics. I mean, you can just read a pure maths book and then you read it, and you cannot really grasp why is there such thing as a differential calculus.
A few years ago, I got a used copy of a college textbook called Calculus as a Liberal Art.
Okay.
And it taught you the calculus through the history of mathematics.
Okay.
And it started with a basic Greek number theory and worked your way all the way up through until you worked like the Leibniz-Newton debates and all that,
Yeah.
and you learn the calculus through the history. And I tell you that kind of, man, that upped my game intellectually, like just understanding the history of the West better.
Right.
In doing that. So yeah, but once again, I haven't practiced calculus, so I can't sit down and do anything with it. Right? Yeah.
There's a related question I think we should just pull up. I just saw this one come in. We're going to go out of order. Samuel says, why is Bayes' theorem so prominent in contemporary philosophy of religion and philosophy in general? It seems kind of weird to me to treat philosophy as a type of math. Yeah, this is a good question. Jim and I have talked about these Bayesian tennis matches, and I actually got a conversation with somebody the other day, and I tend to be skeptical, as I think you are, Jim, of some of these probability assignments, right? That we see in these sorts of debates. So like sometimes you'll have philosophers say, well, this hypothesis has a 99.97% probability, right? And it's like, how are you getting these assignments, right? It just seems ridiculous to me. So
let's set the prima facie, probability of God's existence at 0.6.
Yeah, or the resurrection, or this or that, or naturalism from evil, or something like that. Like they'll set these specific assignments, and I'm like, how on earth are you getting? And I've never been convinced by that. I will say this, however, I think that it's still useful just using like the general tool of Bayesian probability to just ask from a reasonable or broad degree of expectation. What is the likelihood that I would expect this data given this hypothesis? And what is the likelihood that I would expect this data without that hypothesis? And now we're going to be working largely off intuitions, right?
Yes.
But I think this is still a useful tool because, for example, I'll give the one that I like. Like if I and this is from Tim McGrew. He does a lot in probability theory, right? If I'm walking in the woods and I find a cabin and it looks abandoned, because the door is hanging off and there's moss, but I go inside the cabin, I discover that there's a cup of hot steeping tea. I immediately revise my hypothesis to this is an occupied cabin. Right. Why? Well, because I just know, right? Like by like the light of reason that I'm far more likely to discover a cup of hot steeping tea on the hypothesis this cabin is occupied rather than the hypothesis this cabin is abandoned. Now, I don't know what the probability is. I have no idea. What is the probability that we'll find a cup of tea in any cabin? I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Maybe we could use a frequentist approach and try and figure that out, but I generally don't know.
But here we go, though. Here we
Right.
go, right? Is it occupied, or is it you're just not the first person there that day, right? And so now we're like into, what's his name? The guy that I had the argument with in my last paper.
Paul Draper.
Draper. Like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's not, it's like about what's the best available explanation, not like the intrinsically most probable, right?
Right.
And so now we got all sorts of things we're going to have to like intuitively set probabilities to, right? You know what I mean?
Right,
And that's
yeah.
why I think it just gets out of hand and we're not talking about reality anymore. Yeah.
And I definitely want to bring Eduardo in this because this is a general math question. But what I want to say is there's nothing wrong generally with working off intuitions here, right? Because I think intuitions are valid. I mean, we use them morally and epistemically all the time, but they can be defeated. So what you need to do in a case like that, for me not to claim that T is evidence in favor of this hypothesis, is you have to give me some reason for that would defeat that intuition, and maybe there is one, but otherwise, I still think that's a valid move to make. Yeah, Eduardo, come on in here.
There's just so much to say, but I would say that like Bayes theorem, just to jump on that, it's the nice thing about it is that when you're quoting some kind of probability or likelihood of something to be true, of some statement, or degree of how would you say it? It's like small degree of belief in some kind of statement.
Yep.
Is that you're actually factoring out what your hypothesis is. So what are your priors? What's there's some priors, so there's something that you know about the world beforehand,
Right.
and this is sort of shaping. It's already influencing what's the likelihood of some other statement, because there's no such thing as a statement out of the blue. I mean, usually.
Right.
That's right.
So you always need to work out maybe you have some hypothesis, or you have some, like in mathematical distribution, we say, okay, I'm assuming that my variable is a Gaussian distribution, for example, or I know this and this properties because it's just an observation. And so, but in general, the good thing, I mean, the powerful thing about Bayes' theorem is that it's making so clear, establishing a clear relationship between the outcome and your prior hypothesis, which is very true because people tend to forget about this. Like people quote numbers without the context, and so every statistics, every number has to be put in context. Of course, what's the so what are your hypotheses first of all, and what's happening somewhere else? So I would say this is the reason why, and that's a very good. Like to answer the second part of the questions, like it's weird to me to treat philosophy as a type of math. I wouldn't say that you would treat philosophy as a type of math, but you're using mathematics as a language, like we would use logic, to make your statements in a very definite way. It's very clear. So this is, if I'm writing an equation, and this is, I can write term to terms what it leads to, and I can see what's the evolution. So I can go from A to B in a very clear way. I'm not saying that you have to do this all the time. There's many times you cannot do this, and you just need to proceed by reasoning. But in general, like in sciences and philosophy, or I don't know, social sciences as well, you can like say, okay, if I make this assumption and then I have this assumption, and I think that this this function has some kind of behavior, then I can sort of extrapolate and see what this leads to in a very clear way. And it's there's no you can play around with words much less than you would do in a normal discourse. If you have some argument, you can say, look, this leads to kind of this prediction, or if I'm going along this path, then that this kind of thing must happen to these variables, or I should observe this kind of phenomenon, whatever that is. Again, this is not to say that you should use mathematics in every context, because you can be very badly misled. And
we've seen this recently, haven't we? Right?
I don't know what you're talking about, but
because people see fancy math, they're like, "Oh, this must be legitimate," right? Yeah.
And on the issue of Bayes' theorem in philosophy, and as Pat knows, man, I as just a sort of a part of the game.
I love that you know that it's a game that you love to play.
I love it. Yeah, it's like my weak spot. I'm doing it again. I know I'm doing it now, right? I wish I wasn't doing it, right? But here I am doing it, like writing papers on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And even though I know it's the wrong thing to do, right? But the thing is debate always becomes like we always end up just arguing over what we set as being in the relevant background.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think what it ends up showing is the debate isn't the first order issue. It's this higher order thing always. It's always what's in the background. Like, what is the given background? That's where the real philosophical debate is, right? And if only we had that set, yeah, we could math our way through it. But here's the problem. Like, here's like the recalcitrance of being, right? Like, human life is complicated. There's always this like unargued for background that we have to like presume, and when we can't, that's where philosophy breaks out, right? And maybe it might end up being irresolvable, right? But that's where we need to be, is in the background, not like inevitably the real issue is going to be there, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's, Eduardo mentioned experience, right? Is like, if we're going to have reasonable degrees of expectation, we need experience, right?
Yeah. But that's just to go a little bit further on this. I remember the paper you sent me on the Castro consensus was completely based on Bayesian reasoning. Like when we have a consensus in a scientific community and we say that, scientific consensus is healthy, we are assuming that it's healthy, and it's highly unlikely for so many experts to be wrong at the same time, under the assumption that there's no political pressure. And this is a very strong assumption that you cannot really say that all the time. So you need to discriminate the kind of scientific consensus depending on the hypothesis. And it's a very simplistic toy model of the world, but it's sort of explaining in a very clear way. And it's not just by putting words after another. You can clearly see in mathematics. That's like, if you have these assumptions and then you work them out coherently, you end up with this conclusion. And so if the assumption is there is no independence of, there is some political pressure, then I cannot conclude that the consensus I reached in science is some kind of is a good proxy to the actual truth of the issue,
right?
And it's unrelated to the external political pressure. And there, I remember that paper. You see it clearly. It's a very good application of that.
It is, yeah, it is. We should do a talk. Eduardo, when we do our next one, maybe we can bring that paper in and discuss it.
Yep.
All right, let's keep moving along here. Good questions. Thought I was going to be calming the brain down.